Good morning. The first item of business is general questions. At question number 1, I call Katy Clark.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what its response is to the decision by Strathclyde Partnership for Transport to progress with proposals for bus franchising.
Minister Jim Fairley.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. We very much welcome the work that Strathclyde Partnership for Transport has undertaken to update the regional bus strategy, given the importance of the bus sector to their region. It's right that local transport authorities explore how best to use the measures in the Transport Scotland Act 2019, as our approach is to enable them to determine what is best to improve their services, and Transport Scotland will continue to engage with all stakeholders, including SPT. Work on the franchising guidance is ongoing, and we will be sharing that with the NZ Committee along with the affected parties prior to finalisation and formal publication.
Katy Clark.
Since 2006, there has been a 44% decrease in the number of bus routes across Scotland, with 190 routes being cut in the last year alone. Over 83% of passengers support Strathclyde Partnership for Transport's implementing bus franchising across the region, which would allow for better oversight of fares, routes and timetables. So what work is the Scottish Government doing to ensure that SPT have the necessary financial support to enable them to proceed with franchising?
Minister.
The Scottish Government continues to work with SPT, as I said in my original answer. There are a number of phases that they will have to go through. Once we have the guidance cleared, we will present that to the NZ Committee, and then it will be up to SPT to come back to us to talk about what they need to do next.
Jamie Hepburn.
Many constituents contact me regarding the decline in service offered by the main commercial bus operators in Cumbernauld and Forsyth, and that includes in taking over 2 hours to be and to ensure they're at their work in Glasgow by 9 AM. Can the Minister set out what opportunities the new powers for local authorities that SPT are utilising, what they present for returning to a more comprehensive bus network and promoting public transport use?
Minister.
Well, the bus powers within the Transport Scotland Act enable local transport authorities to determine the provision of services, the routes, the frequency of those services, as well as the fare structures that should be in place and the type of vehicles that should be used on local roads. So while we want all local transport authorities to be able to improve their bus services, it is for them to decide what the powers, if any, are best to address the transport challenges in their individual areas.
Question number 2, Ariane Burgess.
To ask the Scottish Government what scoping work it has undertaken regarding electrifying and dualling the Highland Main Line.
Cabinet Secretary Fiona Hislop.
Network Rail, instructed by Transport Scotland, investigated options to electrify the Highland Main Line. This work contributed to developing our plans to replace ScotRail's intercity fleet of trains, which I announced to Parliament in December 2024. As I said in the debate led by the member last week, we are firmly committed to electrifying our railways. Projects already delivered are underway, like Edinburgh to Glasgow, Barrhead and East Kilbride, and our recently announced plans for the phased electrification of Fife and Border routes are evidence of this commitment. A refreshed rail decarbonisation action plan will be published during this parliamentary term, and it will specify how we are going to achieve phased decarbonisation of our rail network by 2045. I appreciate there are potential improvements to be secured in dualling the Highland Main Line. However, there are currently no active projects underway.
Ariane Burgess.
I appreciate the Cabinet Secretary for that response. My interest in particular is in the Highland Main Line, and as long as 17 years ago, the Scottish Government promised rail passengers that they would cut journey times between Inverness and Perth by half an hour. In the intervening 17 years, just 4 minutes have been saved because this Government has not prioritised rail with its spending. What will the Cabinet Secretary do to fulfil the broken promise and provide speedy, reliable rail for people in the Highlands?
Cabinet Secretary.
I think the member is incorrect. Indeed, rail constitutes the vast bulk of my budget compared to other transport modes. Indeed, rail is over £1.5 billion a year, and trunk roads roads issues are about £1 billion. So I think it's incorrect to characterise the Scottish Government's funding that way. And indeed, the extensive announcements I've made both on procurement and also electrification that have been welcomed, particularly in the Borders and Fife, is testament to our commitment to rail.
Question number 3, Mark Griffin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what its response is to the Housebuilding Statistics for Scotland quarterly update, new house building and affordable housing supply to end June 2025.
Cabinet Secretary Mary McCallum.
Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government recognises the challenges that are set out in the latest housing statistics. That's why we've increased the 25-26 housing budget to £808 million. When we did this in September, when we doubled our funding for acquisitions to £80 million under the Housing Emergency Action Plan. This will help to acquire family homes now to relieve very evident pressure. We're also committing up to £4.9 billion over the coming 4 years, which is a major increase, and uptick in delivery will follow.
Mark Griffin.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. But in 2018, Scotland saw 23,337 housing starts. This year, it's just 15,104, a 35% collapse. Social starts are at their lowest level since 1997, when we started publishing these statistics. Now, since 2018, 3,435 more children have ended up in temporary accommodation, and tragically 1,188 more people have died homeless. How will the Cabinet Secretary and the Government reverse this devastating trend, and does the Government have a target date for ending the use of hotels and bed and breakfasts as temporary accommodation for children?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, temporary accommodation and the availability of it is a vital safety net in Scotland's housing and homelessness legislation, but it ought to be just that. It ought to be temporary. The actions that we've taken to date, not least the delivery of 140,000 affordable homes since we came to government, over 100,000 of which have been for social rent, that has meant that in Scotland, proportionately, we have access to 47% more affordable homes per head than in England, and 73% more than in Wales. Despite that, Mark Griffin's quite right, there is considerable strain in the system. I don't want to see any children spending time longer in temporary accommodation than they need to, and that's why, on the 2nd of September, our Housing Emergency Action Plan committed to a number of actions to turn around this trend, including setting out multi-annual funding for affordable homes, setting out a record investment over the coming years in affordable homes, and other changes, including in the planning system, so that it facilitates the change that we are determined to see.
Rona Mackay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I have to say it's with some nerve that Mark Griffin can stand here and criticise the Scottish Government's action on tackling Scotland's housing emergency, when the last Labour administration of 2003 to 2007 dismally completed only 6 council homes, lacking crucial innovation and collaboration with local authorities. Can the Cabinet Secretary please advise how the Scottish Government's ambitious investment in voids and acquisitions will empower local authorities to replenish pre-existing house stock to create permanent homes for hundreds of families across Scotland?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, and I very much welcome the question and the context, because as well as setting out the new affordable homes that we've delivered since coming to government, which sets us apart in the United Kingdom, it's also important to use the stock that we have just now to better use. So Rona Mackay asks about voids and acquisitions. Since declaring a national housing emergency, we have brought almost 1,000 homes into affordable use between 24 and 25, and that was through £40 million of targeted investments in acquisitions and in turning empty social voids back into use. On the 2nd of September, in that emergency plan that I mentioned, we have doubled the fund to £80 million. And I've asked councils to go out now to use that money to acquire homes on the market, family homes, because these are the ones that will be needed to get children out of temporary accommodation. Do it now, relieve the pressure, and we'll invest in home building at the same time.
Question number 4, Liz Smith.
To ask the Scottish Government, in light of it being Scottish Women and Girls in Sport Week, what financial progress has been made against its 2021-22 programme for government commitment to double its investment in sport to £100 million by the end of the current parliamentary session?
Minister Marie Todd.
The Scottish Government's Women and Girls in Sport Week campaign aims to increase the visibility of women and girls in sport, highlight opportunities to get involved and discuss barriers and drivers to participation. The 25-26 budget underlines our ongoing commitment to sport and active living by protecting the investment despite a challenging economic background. We recognise the significant impact that spending on sport and physical activity makes in delivering health outcomes, and doubling the investment into sport and active living during this parliamentary term remains the ambition of the Scottish Government.
Liz Smith.
The Minister will understand that the 2021 programme for government commitment by the SNP to double the investment to £100 million substantially raised the hopes of Scotland's sporting bodies, who have obviously been struggling with resource issues for years. So it's little wonder that they are aghast when they see the figures in the revised autumn budget coming in at around £40 million if you take the Sport Scotland spending at £35 million and just under £5 million for the Active Healthy Living programme. And worse still, when they see that 40 million figure is down on the 2021-22 revised autumn budget of £44.5 million. So can I ask the SNP ministers, will they honour that 2021 commitment that they made in their programme for government?
Minister.
So let me assure the member and the Parliament as a whole that we meet regularly with sports governing bodies, and we absolutely recognise the challenging situation that they are facing, worsened, frankly, by some of the decisions in Westminster, like the Employers' National Insurance, which has added strain to a sector that, as Liz Smith acknowledges, was already in difficulty. Now, it remains our ambition to maintain, to double that budget. We have one more budget to go before the end of this term of Parliament. I'd be very, very hopeful that the Scottish Conservatives, unlike last year, who didn't find it in their hearts possible to vote for the nearly £50 million investment in sport, would find it in their hearts not just to support the budget and maintain that investment, but actually to negotiate to increase it. That would be very great.
Question number 5, Alec Rowley.
Presiding Officer, to ask the Scottish Government what rights patients have when their local medical centre has been deemed unfit for purpose by their NHS board.
Cabinet Secretary Neil Gray.
Are responsible for ensuring the provision of primary medical services in their area. My officials are working with all health boards to develop a whole system NHS infrastructure investment plan. A key part of this planning will be the development of an investment strategy for primary care, considering both priorities and delivery models. And spending on primary medical services by this government has increased over the past decade, both in cash and real terms. In cash terms, spending has gone from £763 million in 2013-14 to almost £1.1 billion in 2023-24.
Alec Rowley.
Presiding Officer, according to NHS 5, the initial agreement document for new purpose-built community health and wellbeing centres in Lochgelly and Kincardine was approved by the Scottish Government in January 2020. In 2021, the then Health Secretary, in answer to a question from Annabel Ewan about Lochgelly, told this Parliament, and I quote, "I give the member an absolute confirmation that when we have the outline business case, the funding will be made available." Early 2023, NHS 5 stated the current Lochgelly and Kincardine health centres are older facilities which no longer meet the needs of the local population. Can the Cabinet Secretary understand the level of anger and despair that there is in communities in Lochgelly and in Kincardine when they've been promised time and time again that they would have replacements for these unfit for purpose health centres?
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I thank Alec Rowley for setting that out. Yes, I do understand it because I've met with local residents in Lochgelly and in Kincardine at the request of both Ms Ewing and Ms Somerville, the constituency representatives, highlighting the concerns that Mr Rowley has set out. Our capital position is paused, other than the areas that have been set out in the budget, because of the pressure on our capital budget due to decisions taken out with our control and because of construction inflation. We are in touch with the likes of NHS 5 and all boards in order to get their capital prioritisations, and we hope that we will see greater capital investment coming from the UK budget to allow us to do more within the primary care system.
Brief supplementary, Annabel Ewing.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In fact, NHS 5 has just said that a new medical centre for Lochgelly will in fact be in its top 3 priority projects for capital funding from the Scottish Government. Does the Cabinet Secretary therefore agree that it must surely be Lochgelly's turn now?
Cabinet Secretary.
I much appreciate the work that Annabel Ewing has done to advance the case for the Lochgelly Medical Centre. Obviously, I hear what she has said around NHS Fife's prioritisation. In terms of the capital allocation, she will understand that will be determined based on the allocation that we receive from the UK Government at the budget and the work that is being carried out regarding the spending review and the infrastructure investment plan. But my wish is to see much greater investment going into the capital estate for primary care services and to see the likes of Lochgelly, Kincardine and others seeing development happen.
Question number 6, Jackson Carlaw.
To ask the Scottish Government what engagement it has had with Glasgow City Council regarding its proposals for an at-city boundary congestion charge and a toll on the Clyde Tunnel.
Cabinet Secretary Fiona Hislop.
The Scottish Government has not held specific discussions with Glasgow City Council regarding any potential at-city boundary charge, nor regarding any toll charge for use on the Clyde Tunnel.
Jackson Carlaw.
Well, I wonder if the Cabinet Secretary might urgently do so, because my Eastwood constituents would be unfairly charged by the SNP-run council every time they cross the local authority boundary by car for work, university, college, family and social reasons. In effect, every time they went to the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital for essential medical care, they would be charged for crossing the city boundary. Moreover, if every other local authority followed suit, we would effectively have a series of custom posts all over Scotland, with people being charged every time they crossed a city boundary or a council boundary anywhere in Scotland. This would be a disaster for the economy and a completely unrealistic and unfair burden on motorists.
Cabinet Secretary.
So my understanding was that the Conservatives wanted to have more decentralisation and more powers for council, but obviously he now
Let's
wants
hear the Cabinet Secretary.
He wants me to step in on an issue that should best be resolved between East Renfrewshire Council and Glasgow Council. Now, I would remind the member that there is existing legislation. It goes back to 2001 from the Labour and then Labour executive for the road user charging powers. It's up to local authorities to make decisions. They want to manage their own road space. They want to manage their own maintenance. They want to manage their own congestion. And if he doesn't believe that local authorities should be in charge of their own authorities, then perhaps there's more divisions in the Conservative parties than we even realised.
Question number 7, Mark Ruskell.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on the proposed ferry route between Rosyth and Dunkirk.
Minister Jim Fairley.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Scottish Government continues to support the development of our ports and the potential for a new direct freight and passenger ferry service linking Scotland to Europe. Ministers and officials have met with the sponsors on a number of occasions regarding their proposal to introduce a new ferry route between Rosyth and Dunkirk. The Scottish Government is continuing to engage with the sponsors on a variety of issues. But as the member is aware, an obstacle is the border control post requirements which were brought in due to the UK exiting the EU. Now, whilst the Scottish Government welcomes the recent announcement of an outlined SPS agreement between the UK and the EU, until an agreement is finalised, it is impossible for the Scottish Government to provide certainty about the future border control post requirements. But officials are continuing to discuss these and other matters with the sponsors.
Mark Ruskell.
Can I thank the Minister for that response? But he'll be aware that before the summer recess, the First Minister gave assurances that his government would welcome the ferry route and would do everything that we can to remove any obstacles that are in the way. But 4 months on, the biggest barrier remains the border control post designation. I believe that that is resolvable. The ferry is a significant opportunity for the local community, the Scottish economy and for our connection to Europe. So can I ask the Minister, how will the Government support the delivery of this ferry in the coming months? Because time is ticking away. We will lose this ferry. We will lose this direct connection to Europe. We cannot afford to lose this opportunity. And I think the First Minister knows that as well.
Minister.
Mark Ruskell makes very light of border control posts. I think he should not be making very light of border control posts because of the job that they actually do for preserving Scotland's preserving our public health and animal health. But the Scottish Government remains absolutely convinced that Scotland's future is best served by being in the EU, and we remain committed to seeking to achieve that. Improving our transport and trade links with the European mainland is arguably even more important and has even more resonance after the UK's damaging exit from the EU. But while the Scottish Government welcomes the recent announcements of the SPS agreement between the UK and the EU, until an agreement is finalised, it is not possible to confirm what future border control post requirements will be, and the Scottish Government officials are continuing to liaise with the sponsor, and I have asked for a meeting directly with the sponsor myself.
Thank you. That concludes general questions. The next item of business is First Minister's questions. At question number 1, I call Russell Finlay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. John Swinney yesterday launched yet another taxpayer-funded paper on independence, and he's called it a fresh start.
Let's hear Mr Finlay. Let's hear Mr Finlay.
They won't be clapping in a minute. The same John Swinney has dreamed about breaking up the United Kingdom for almost 50 years. He was at the forefront of the Free by 93 campaign. He first became leader of the SNP at the turn of the millennium. In 2014, he played a crucial role in the losing Yes campaign. Thank you, John. And last year, he became SNP leader again. And he really thinks it's plausible to describe his latest independence paper as a fresh start. Is John Swinney having a laugh?
Full names at all times, please. First Minister.
President Officer, before I respond to Mr Finlay, I want to take a moment to welcome the news that Israel and Hamas have agreed the first phase of a peace plan for Gaza. I call on all sides to abide by the terms of the agreement, the release of all hostages and the immediate entry of humanitarian aid into Gaza. After more than 2 years of devastating brutality and loss of life, I know that this will be a moment of relief for many here in Scotland and around the world. I reiterate my call that Palestinians and Israelis must be able to live safely, side by side, based on a two-state solution, and I dearly hope this is the first step towards that outcome, and I express my thanks to all of the mediators who have worked so hard to create this moment and this opportunity for peace. In relation to Mr Finlay's substantive question, I am deadly serious about the arguments for Scottish independence. As a country, we have exercised self-government since 1999 with the establishment of this Parliament, and a number of significant benefits have been achieved for the people of Scotland, some delivered by the previous government, such as the ban on smoking in public places or the introduction of free personal care. Some of them delivered by my government, whether that's about the abolition of tuition fees or minimum unit pricing of alcohol or the introduction of the Scottish Child Payment. But we are at a moment now in Scotland where the rightward drift of the United Kingdom and the stagnation of living standards in our country demonstrate a re-examine of this argument, and that's why independence is the fresh start that Scotland needs.
Russell Finlay.
I think the fact he says he's deadly serious is actually even more worrying than if he was just having a laugh. John Swinney can't offer a fresh start because he's been in the SNP government for almost 20 years. He was Nicola Sturgeon and Alex Salmond's right-hand man, up to his neck in every SNP scandal: ferries, gender self-ID, SQA exams, named persons and many more. He ran down Scotland's economy, and then he ran down Scotland's education system. And a new survey shows that public trust in the Scottish Government is at an all-time low. And this was a Scottish Government survey. So does John Swinney accept that this is a damning judgment on his dismal record?
First Minister.
What my government is focused on is improving the lives of people in Scotland. That's why we are keeping prescriptions free in Scotland, while they're nearly £10 under Labour in England. It's why we're protecting free tuition in Scotland, while they're rising south of the border. It's why we've expanded early learning and childcare. It's why we've extended free school meals. It's why we've introduced the Scottish Child Payment. It's why we abolished peak rail fares on our railways for good, because we are interested in providing practical support to improve the lives of people in Scotland, and we will continue to do so. I noticed in the survey that Mr Finlay is talking about that there's also a question on independence. It indicates that support for independence is at 47%, up from 27% in 1999.
Thank you.
I can see the direction of travel in Scotland, and it's going to independence.
Russell Finlay.
Nicola Sturgeon's book should be in the fiction section, but John Swinney's paper really should be in the fantasy section. And it's not just harmless fantasy, Presiding Officer, but actually dangerous dishonesty. Because this graph here says that Scotland's GDP has grown faster than the rest of the UK, when the opposite is true. Serious and credible experts have demolished this 90-page exercise in wishful thinking. Leading economist Professor Ronald MacDonald said John Swinney's plans are, I quote, totally shambolic and would have a, again quoting, devastating effect.
That's the reality.
He expressed astonishment at the quote, again quote, total ignorance of the SNP's currency position. Damningly, he said all of this will impact on public sector wages, pensions, mortgages, borrowing costs for homes and
Let's hear
businesses.
Mr Finlay.
This is a paper with no solutions. It does nothing to help people's lives here and now. It's an outrage that it was produced by Scottish civil servants. So will John Swinney stop wasting any more taxpayers' money on such nonsense?
First Minister.
President Officer, under the SNP government, GDP per person in Scotland has grown by 10.3% compared to 6.1% in the UK, while productivity has grown at an average rate of 1.1% per year in Scotland compared to the UK average of 0.4%. So that demonstrates that the point that Mr Finlay has put to Parliament is
hear the First Minister.
Is not correct. Now, the issue that Mr Finlay has got to address is that the arguments that he puts forward to preserve the status quo are now completely and utterly threadbare. Labour and Tory politicians said that staying in the United Kingdom would lower our bills, but the opposite has been the case. They promised financial security, but gave us the Liz Truss mini-budget. They assured us that voting no was the surest way for Scotland to remain in the European Union, but Scotland has been taken out against our will. The arguments against Scottish independence have collapsed since 2014, and Scotland is on a pathway to independence.
Russell Finlay.
John Swinney's graph on GDP is wrong, just like his stats last week on income tax were wrong. And if he ever got his way, it would mean extreme tax rises and severe spending cuts for Scotland. Mortgages up, pensions at risk and a hard border with England. Scotland would be divided, smaller and weaker. And despite all of this, John Swinney keeps obsessing about independence, which would make Scots poorer. No wonder public trust in the SNP is at an all-time low. John Swinney is not a fresh start. This man is not a fresh start. He's a tired nationalist with a dismal record. He's not focused on building a strong economy for the future. He's wasting time and taxpayers' money on the same old arguments of the past. So for the sake of Scotland, is he ever going to give up on his independence obsession and move on?
First Minister.
I think it's pretty clear, I think, to any member of the public watching this exchange, that the more Russell Finlay gets personally insulting to his political rivals, the weaker his arguments become. Because what I've marshalled in front of Parliament today is the evidence. Living standards are stagnating in Scotland, and they have stagnated for 15 years.
First Minister, sorry, it's becoming increasingly difficult to hear one another. If members haven't been called to speak, please resist the temptation to do so. Those gathered in the gallery, I am sure, would wish to hear contributions. First Minister.
Presiding Officer, living standards in Scotland as part of the United Kingdom have ground to a halt. Brexit has been a disaster. The implications of the Liz Truss mini-budget have wreaked economic difficulty and havoc on the people of the United Kingdom, and Scotland has been saddled with that despite the promises of lower prices, lower bills and access to the European Union from the No campaign in 2014. I am very proud to lead a campaign which is about focusing on improving living standards in Scotland, transforming the lives of people in Scotland, and will do that through independence.
Question number 2, Anna Sarwar.
Can I firstly welcome the agreement on a Gaza ceasefire, the end of the bloodshed and the release of hostages. This must be real and it needs to last, but it must be backed up by an urgent surge in aid into Gaza and a meaningful pathway to an end of the illegal occupation and a lasting peace where every life, Palestinian or Israeli, is treated as equal. Today we will vote on the Right to Recovery Bill and we will support it at stage 1. 6 years ago, the SNP declared a drugs deaths emergency. And 6 years on, lives are still being lost, families are still grieving, and a generation has been failed. In just the first 6 months of this year, 607 people died from suspected drug overdoses. 1 life lost every 7 hours. And when it comes to recovery, the picture is just as bleak. The SNP haven't delivered the promised rehabilitation beds. But even more shamefully, 77% of areas report being unable to access rehab spaces because they don't have the money they need from the SNP government. Rehab beds lying empty in the middle of a drugs deaths emergency. So can I ask John Swinney, why 6 years into this emergency are beds being left empty and Scots not getting the treatment they need to recover?
First Minister.
President, I recognise the importance of the issues in relation to drugs support for individuals and the necessity of us delivering on the commitments that we have made as part of the programme. In relation to the specific issue that Mr Sarwar raises with me, we set out a commitment to establish 1,000 publicly funded placements per year by 25-26, and the most recent Public Health Scotland publication shows that there were 984 confirmed records of individuals starting a publicly funded residential rehab placement in 2022-23. Now, we've made £38 million available between 8 projects across Scotland to provide additional residential rehabilitation beds. And the latest published figures report a rise in capacity of 88 beds to a total of 513 in September 2024. And there has been further expansion since then. So what I assure Mr Sarwar about is, first of all, the importance of this endeavour, and secondly, the practical steps being taken to implement the commitments that we have given, and we will continue to do so.
Anna Sarwar.
The promises have not been met, and the families left behind deserve justice, not excuses. Shamefully, new figures show that 573 charges for drug dealing had to be dropped in the last 3 years because the cases were time-barred before reaching court. Hundreds of those accused of drug dealing simply walking free, evading justice, not because they were found innocent, but because of this government's incompetence. People selling poison to their communities, given the green light to destroy lives because John Swinney and his tired government can't run a court system that sends drug dealers to prison. 573 drug dealing charges simply dropped. So can John Swinney understand why people will be so angry when they learn that despite 1 life being lost to drugs every 7 hours in Scotland, hundreds of drug dealers are walking free?
First Minister.
President Officer, the issues in relation to the court service are essentially an implication of the period during COVID in which we had a backlog of cases that had to be addressed. And the court service worked incredibly hard and works incredibly hard to erode those backlogs that we are wrestling with. And significant work has been undertaken because, if I then look at other data, our prisons, as the Justice Secretary reported to Parliament last Thursday, our prisons are incredibly congested and in many cases by individuals who have been convicted and sentenced for a long period of time as a consequence of their drug-related activities. And we are wrestling within our prison system, admirably by the Scottish Prison Service, with the congestion of many groups that are involved in organised crime, which is underpinning the drugs issue. So I know that the Crown and the Scottish Courts and Tribunal Service are working incredibly hard in an incredibly focused way to make sure that the perpetrators of illegal drug activity in our society are brought to justice, and many of them are.
Anna Sarwar.
Presiding Officer, there is no justification for hundreds of drug dealers walking free because of the incompetence of this SNP government. No justification at all, because this is a government that has lost control. 607 lives lost in just 6 months, 1 every 7 hours, and 573 drug supply charges unpunished, and still not enough access to treatment or residential rehab for those who want to recover. The truth is, John Swinney's approach is failing both victims and communities. Dealers slipping through the cracks, people dying waiting for help, and families losing loved ones and left without hope. 6 years ago, 6 years since they declared an emergency, and still Scotland leads Europe in drugs deaths. John Swinney has abandoned both justice and recovery. So isn't it the case that we will never get to grips with Scotland's drugs deaths emergency while he and the SNP stay in charge?
First Minister.
President Officer, the Government has taken a focused approach to addressing the drugs issue in our society over a number of years, and a number of significant steps have been taken to address those questions. First of all, I've put on the record the issues around about the expansion of rehabilitation placements, and that progress is being achieved as we committed to doing so. We supported the delivery of the first of the safe consumption rooms, which we know, based on the evidence that is available to us, has saved lives as a consequence of the intervention of the Thistle. We've expanded the rollout of naloxone, which is resulting in significant avoidance of death and injury to individuals who are using drugs. And in addition to that, we are seeing, and I recognise that the levels of drug deaths are far too high, but we are seeing a decrease in the last year of 13% in drugs deaths in Scotland, although we must maintain absolute vigilance and focus to make sure that we continue to make that progress. And finally, on the issue of the criminal justice system, our prison system is absolutely full of individuals, many of whom have been imprisoned because of their drug-related activity. So it is quite simply wrong for Mr Sarwar to suggest that people are not being brought to justice because of their criminal activity, and that will remain the focused priority of the Scottish Government.
Question number 3, Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Can I associate myself entirely with the First Minister's remarks about progress towards peace in the Middle East? Can I also take a moment to offer the sincere thanks of the Scottish Liberal Democrats for the life and work of Sir Ming Campbell, who was lost to us last week. Ming was a titan of British politics. He commanded respect in the Parliament in which he served and in homes across this country. He was a mentor and friend to so many in my party, and we miss him. I offer condolences to his family at this difficult time. Presiding Officer, when companies generate renewable energy, they're expected to give money back to the local community. But the amount of cash we're talking about here is absolutely pitiful, because the rules haven't changed in more than a decade. All the while, people are still shivering in the shadow of turbines, unable to heat their homes. So will the Scottish Government listen to the Liberal Democrats, to Highland Council, to Shetland Council, and change those rules to cut energy bills for local people?
First Minister.
President, first of all, can I thank Mr Cole-Hamilton for his words, as I thank Mr Sarwar for his words on the situation in Gaza, and also associate myself with his remarks about Mingus Campbell, Lord Campbell of Pittenweem. I was warmly and fondly welcomed into the House of Commons by Ming Campbell in 1997 and enjoyed far too many uproariously funny conversations with Ming and his late wife Elspeth, who were always wonderful company. And I convey to the Liberal Democrats, as I have conveyed privately, my appreciation and my sympathy as they wrestle with the loss of a giant of the Liberal Democrat movement. In relation to the substantive question on renewable energy, I actually have a lot of sympathy with Mr Cole Hamilton's point. The issue of community benefits arising out of wind farm developments is regulated by the United Kingdom Government, and we have been pressing for some time to mandate community benefits from mature onshore renewable technologies and to create greater benefit for communities, particularly in relation to the reduction of fuel bills. So I'm sympathetic to his point, but it's an issue that the Government continues to press the UK Government on, and we will continue to do so.
Alex Cole-Hamilton.
But you can't dodge this entirely, and some of this lies with his government too. Yesterday I was in North Edinburgh with Ed Davey and Councillor Sanna Dijkstra-Downey. We met at Edinburgh College apprentices who are being trained for good green jobs, installing home insulation, solar panels and heat pumps, technologies that are ready to go, and at the heart of Liberal Democrats' realistic plan to halve household energy bills by 2035. John Swinney's own independent advisers now say his government is extremely unlikely to meet its fuel poverty target. They found people catching hypothermia in their own homes, missing meals to top up the meter, burning their own floorboards for fuel. The Scottish Government's consultation on the amount energy companies give back closed 6 months ago, but nothing's changed. Under Liberal Democrat proposals, there are millions of pounds out there that could warm homes across Scotland. So when will the First Minister change those rules?
First Minister.
Well, the issues are essentially the existing arrangements which are specified by the United Kingdom Government are non-mandatory. So, as a consequence, there is a limit. It's actually one of the examples of the constitutional point that I make. I'm very sympathetic, but I can't exercise powers that legally I'm not entitled to exercise. That's actually one of the limitations of the constitutional arrangements. So I'm absolutely with Mr Cole-Hamilton in wanting to use the energy wealth of Scotland, which is absolutely beyond dispute. We all agree about that. I'm absolutely with him on the desire to eradicate fuel poverty. I spent some time in the island of Yell in Shetland earlier on in the summer, where I saw an excellent example of a community wind farm which is creating real benefit in the locality, owned by the community. So these models can be delivered where there is community ownership, and we have, and the Scottish Government enabled that development to be undertaken in the island of Yell. But I then went to the main island in Shetland and saw a colossal wind farm, the Viking Energy Project, which is not delivering the right level of benefit to the community, nor is it eradicating fuel poverty, where people in Shetland are living cheek by jowl with one of the largest wind farms in Europe and paying the highest levels of fuel bill and also living in fuel poverty. So the powers to arrest that do not rest in this Parliament. They rest with the UK Government, and I'm determined and very keen to work with Mr Cole-Hamilton to get those powers here so that we can do something about it for the people of Shetland and the people of West Edinburgh.
Question number 4, Claire Adamson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what assessment the Scottish Government has made of any implications for its work to mitigate the two-tilt benefit cap of the UK Government's reported proposals to replace the cap with a tapered system.
First Minister.
President Officer, I have obviously seen the press speculation to which Ms Adamson refers. It's important that the UK Government lets us know as soon as possible about any plans they may have, because, as Ms Adamson will know, the Scottish Government is pressing ahead with our own measures to abolish the two-child limit, which should have been undertaken as one of the first acts of the Labour Government. And the Scottish Fiscal Commission estimates that 43,000 children in Scotland would benefit from the Scottish Government's two-child limit payment, and Scottish Government modelling shows that 20,000 children will be kept out of relative poverty as a result.
Claire Adamson.
I thank the First Minister for his answer. In hearing these murmurings, it was not surprising to find out that Labour is now backpedalling on these plans. With a record 4.5 million children living in poverty under the Labour Government, Plans to introduce a tapered system is nowhere good enough. Can the First Minister join me in calling for the UK Government to reconsider this short-sighted proposal and instead follow the Scottish Government's lead, dump the cap and dump the so-called rape clause?
First Minister.
I very much associate myself with the comments that Claire Anderson has made. The Scottish Government is taking measures which are resulting in a reduction in child poverty in Scotland, but all of the estimates that we see is as a consequence of the actions of the Labour Government, particularly in welfare reform, there is likely to be a rise in child poverty across the rest of the United Kingdom, and of course across the rest of the United Kingdom child poverty is rising. So I make the plea today, as I have made it on many other occasions, for the Labour Government to recognise the absolute imperative of eradicating child poverty, take the measures to lift the two-child cap, and then enable the Scottish Government to use the resources that we are doing to mitigate another Westminster decision that is bad for Scotland, to take other measures to eradicate child poverty in Scotland.
Question number 5, Brian Whittle.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's response is to reports that the mental health budget has been reduced in the 25-26 autumn budget revision.
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, the budget remains as originally published at £270.5 million.
Brian Whittle.
Can I thank the First Minister for that answer? But the situation speaks to a wider problem across health and social care, namely that it is verging on impossible to follow the path from a Scottish Government spending commitment to the frontline support it is intended to provide. Audit Scotland and the Fraser Allender Institute have repeatedly warned that the complex and convoluted methods used by the Scottish Government are barriers to effective public scrutiny. And now we have organisations directly impacted by this funding seemingly unable to determine how or even if that money that was promised will reach them. Presiding Officer, as Scotland's Mental Health Partnership said themselves, transparency is essential. Now, the First Minister might be able to explain where these tens of millions of pounds of public money are when he has a briefing note in front of him, but how does he expect the public, the organisations who rely on it and those who scrutinise the Government to do the same?
First Minister.
Well, I think the transparency and the clarity was in my original answer. The budget remains as originally published at £270.5 million. And I say I understand the importance of this issue and the significance that Mr Whittle attaches to all of this. But I simply make the observation that it's interesting that Mr Whittle is interested in the budget of £270.5 million for mental health support, but he wasn't interested enough to vote for it when the budget came to Parliament. And it's all very well coming here complaining about budgets, but people have got to vote for them to be spent in the community in the first place.
Absolutely. Paul Sweeney.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Dr Pavan Shreddy, Vice Chairman of the Royal College of Psychiatrists, has described the autism and ADHD waiting time scandal as a public health emergency. So will the Scottish Government fulfil its commitment to expend 10% of the NHS budget on mental health by the end of this Parliament, so that those trapped on the waiting lists will have some reassurance that they will get the support they need?
First Minister.
The Government is on track to fulfil that commitment.
Thank you. Question number 6, Michael Matheson.
To ask the First Minister, following Scotland's Global Investment Summit 2025, whether he will provide an update on the Scottish Government's work to attract international investment into Scotland's economy.
First Minister.
Scotland is a nation which is extremely attractive to investors due to our skilled workforce, world-leading universities, a strong presence in skilled workforce in sectors like energy and a supportive business environment. That is why we have been ranked as the top destination for foreign direct investment outside of London and the South East for the last 10 consecutive years. This work is led by the Deputy First Minister, who has been actively engaged, as I have been, in the Global Investment Summit which took place in Edinburgh this week.
Michael Matheson.
Scotland's record has been consistently good in attracting direct foreign investment into Scotland. Last year alone it attracted 135 projects and is ranked the 6th most attractive location in the top 10 locations in Europe for foreign direct investment. The First Minister, though, will recognise that critical to delivering a just transition, we need to make sure that we attract energy manufacturing capacity here to Scotland to support us in the building out of our renewables. Can I therefore ask the First Minister what specific action has been taken in order to ensure that we attract that type of investment to create the jobs we're looking to do here in the Scottish economy?
First Minister.
A number of steps have been taken, particularly in relation to the strengthening of the scoping and consenting arrangements for particularly offshore renewables projects, and the Government is now very focused on taking those decisions. We obviously work very closely with the United Kingdom Government and press the arguments, particularly with GB Energy, for there to be, and also with those responsible for the national grid, to ensure that there is connectivity for these projects so that the supply chain can have confidence in making its investment decisions. Now, of course, there are a number of developments that have taken their course, Sumitomo at Nig or the developments at Ardésir, which are very strong indications of good foundations for the supply chain. But we need every step of that journey to be undertaken to give us confidence in attracting investment, and the Scottish Government is focused on making sure that's the case.
Craig Hoy.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In a week when John Swinney released yet another taxpayer-funded fantasy pamphlet on independence, the City of London Corporation stood shoulder to shoulder with Scotland to unlock new opportunities for growth. But two areas where this SNP government has effectively scuppered future inward investment are nuclear energy and oil and gas exploration, both of which are vital to our energy security and our economic security. So now freed from the shackles of the extremist Greens, why doesn't John Swinney do the right thing by the Scottish economy and commit to fully drilling the North Sea and ending his government's student union politics on nuclear energy in Scotland?
First Minister.
Well, we'll make our policy choices, and on the nuclear question, I've made a policy choice that I want to make sure that Scotland's natural and sustainable sources of energy are the ones that we should develop, because that's better for our people and our planet, and I'm very proud to defend that in this Parliament today. And then secondly, on the question of the oil and gas sector, I really think it is the shiniest of brass necks imaginable for Craig Hoy to indicate to me that there is an issue about, on the question of oil and gas activity, because the Conservative government that he supported presided over a punitive tax regime on the energy profits levy, which is recognised by every commentator to be the biggest impediment to the security of the North Sea oil and gas sector, and Mr Hoy should face up to the realities of the dreadful decisions that the last Conservative government made.
Thank you. We move to constituency and general supplementaries, and I call Emma Harper.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, the General Secretary of the RCN said health and care services would cease to function without migrant nursing staff. Does the First Minister agree with this statement, and will he outline what assessment his government has made of the impact of the Labour government's new immigration rules on vital essential workers in Scotland's NHS?
First Minister.
I think the General Secretary of the Royal College of Nursing has given a very silent warning to all of us about the welcome that has to be extended to staff from other countries to come and work in our National Health Service. In the year ending June 2025, the number of health and care worker visas issued to nursing professionals fell by 80%. 80%. Now, that is going to have a damaging effect on the operation of our National Health Service. We all know there are challenges about the size of our working age population, and we need to have an appropriate skilled worker visa route which works in the interest of the National Health Service, and that's one of the reasons why having control of these issues in Scotland will be better for the people of Scotland.
Absolutely. Alexander Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, a recent report has uncovered that NHS patients in my region and across Scotland were forced to receive electronic shock treatment against their will almost 1,100 times last year. And in around 2,000 cases out of 4,000, this outdated procedure was performed on people who, because of their mental state, were deemed incapable of giving consent. So what action can the Scottish Government put in place to ensure that vulnerable patients are protected from receiving this ethically unacceptable procedure?
First Minister.
Sir, I will take away, if Mr Stewart would like to write to me with the details, I'll explore that in more detail. His issue merits a deeper answer than I can offer him at this particular stage. My first reaction would be that such judgments have to be made on the basis of clinical opinion, but obviously he raises a wider and more significant question which I would rather have the opportunity to explore, and if he would care to write to me, I'll give him a substantive response.
Thank you. Martin Whitfield.
I'm very grateful, Presiding Officer. A report published yesterday, Improving Care Experience Delivering the Promise, by the Accounts Commission and Auditor General, concluded from the outset there was no assessment of what resources and skills were needed to deliver the promise by 2030, or how success would be defined or measured. First Minister, who should take responsibility for that failure?
First Minister.
As Mr Whitfield knows, I take responsibility for everything here. I'm the First Minister of Scotland. I don't dodge that for a moment. And we gave a commitment as a government to honour the promise. And in terms of the definition of success, I'm a wee bit mystified by that point in the Audit Scotland report. It's pretty clear what the promise has got to achieve by 2030, and we are making progress in that respect. I think I understand the interest of Mr Whitfield in this question, but there has been substantive progress made. For example, we have now we've taken action to ensure that no young people under 18 are admitted to young offenders institutes. We have fewer children in Scotland growing up in care since 2020, a reduction of 18.1%. Incidents of physical restraint and seclusion are declining in children's residential accommodation, and more people with care experience are going on to positive destinations 9 months after leaving school. Now, I acknowledge that there is more work to be done in this respect. The work has been taken forward very effectively by the Minister responsible, Natalie Dawn-Innes. She has my full support, and we of course have legislation that Parliament can scrutinise on this issue that will be dealt with by Parliament before the close of the parliamentary session.
Michelle Thompson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The latest Scottish Chamber of Commerce quarterly economic indicator survey published this morning shows 7 out of 10 Scottish firms continue to struggle with higher employment costs and have concerns about further potential adverse policies arising from the UK Labour Government. Has the Scottish Government had the chance to assess the impact of these increased national insurance contributions for employers in Scotland, a tax on Scottish businesses? And if so, what are their findings?
First Minister.
President, this is a serious issue because it has reduced the competitiveness and opportunities for growth within the Scottish economy. The Government's analysis shows that the changes could cost employers in Scotland over £1.7 billion, and the cost to public services are of the order of over £500 million. Now, this indicates a significant burden that is being carried by business within Scotland and, as a consequence, is an inhibitor of growth. And it is beyond me why a government that apparently supports economic growth is taking such a measure. It's another example of why we should take decisions here in Scotland on our behalf, which will be in the interest of the Scottish people and the Scottish economy.
Tess White.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, NHS Grampian has plunged into further financial crisis, with the board's financial director saying it's struggling to stay afloat. And this morning, a diagnostic report from KPMG said that expenditure has risen by £153 million. That's a 33% increase. NHS Grampian has already the lowest bed base in Scotland. The Cabinet Secretary has failed to get a grip. The strain is intolerable for staff and patients. So please, First Minister, will you meet with the board, who this morning put out a Facebook post and said they have a path to improvement? I don't think so. Will you meet with them urgently to discuss their financial crisis in advance of the winter?
First Minister.
The Government has taken measures in relation to NHS Grampian, and the board is under a very significant level of additional scrutiny as a consequence of the issues that Tess White puts to me. Now, I know the Cabinet Secretary is meeting the board on Monday. I'll wait to get a readout of that report. I'm very happy to engage. I discussed the performance of the National Health Service on a weekly basis with my officials, so I will reflect on the points that Tess White has put to me, but I do assure her that the issues which are important for the delivery of healthcare to the communities in the North East of Scotland is being properly and effectively scrutinised and delivered, and I will ask the Health Secretary to write to her with an update on these issues.
Rhoda Grant.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The First Minister will be aware that the only islander on the board of CMAL has not had his membership renewed. This is a snub to our island communities who are left yet again with no islander on the board. Can I ask the First Minister what he's going to do to increase the number of islanders on the board of CMAL and ensure that islanders are represented on boards that are crucial to their survival?
First Minister.
As Rhoda Grant will appreciate, the appointment of members to boards is undertaken by a process that's essentially overseen by the ethical standards advisors in this process, and those processes must take their course. However, her point is a substantial point about the necessity for island opinion and island experience to inform the decisions of bodies that are acting on issues that are significantly impacting on island communities. So regardless of board appointments, I would expect CMAL, Caledonian McBrain, Highlands Islands Enterprise, the Crown Estate Scotland, all of these different bodies that have got locus in relation to Nature Scot, all these other bodies have got locus in relation to the issues and experience of islanders, to go to the absolute lengths to make sure they can hear islander opinions, listen to them and address those issues, because they're legitimate issues that have to be taken seriously by all these boards. And although membership cannot perhaps in all circumstances reflect the legitimate aspiration that Rhoda Grant puts to me, boards must listen to islanders and act on their behalf, and I will ensure that's the case.
John Mason.
Thank you very much. We all support the right to protest, assemble and march and so on, and yet at the same time we have the Hate Crime Act, which makes it an offence to stir up hatred. And can the First Minister say that he thinks we have the right balance, or can we get the right balance? Because some groups, for example, Catholic and Irish people, feel threatened by the repeated orange marches in Glasgow, and Jewish people feel threatened by the repeated pro-Palestinian protests.
First Minister.
This is a very sensitive issue, and I have to be careful also here that we're in territory here where Police Scotland have got to make careful judgments about a whole variety of different circumstances, which have been long-standing in Scottish society. Some of these issues are more easy to handle than others. But fundamentally, I believe that we have to recognise the right to peaceful, respectful public assembly and freedom of expression. We all enjoy those rights and we're committed to upholding them. However, the right to peaceful assembly and expression should never be used to carry out or justify any form of hateful, violent, intimidating or otherwise criminal behaviour. And any form of hate crime is completely and utterly unacceptable, and the Act that Parliament passed in the Hate Crime and Public Order Act Scotland 2021 includes rigorous safeguards on free speech, and we respect everyone's right to this.
Lorna Slater.
Just 2 weeks ago, our capital city, my hometown, Edinburgh, backed Scottish Green councillors' calls to ensure that no public money is being used to bankroll Israel's genocide. This comes more than a month since our Parliament voted to back our calls for boycott, divestment and sanctions against the genocidal Israeli regime. Will the First Minister tell me what additional legislative changes the Scottish Government will pursue to enable local authorities like Edinburgh to legally adopt the BDS policies this Parliament has agreed to support?
First Minister.
President Officer, I set out to Parliament in my statement on the 3rd of September the actions that are within the competence and responsibility of the Scottish Parliament to take forward. The Government will pursue that agenda to make sure that we fulfil the commitments that I gave to Parliament.
Thank you. Keith Brown.
Thank you, President Officer. This week, as we've heard, the Scottish Government published A Fresh Start with Independence. At a time when many of my constituents are struggling to heat their homes and pay for their food shopping due to Westminster inaction, and bearing in mind the promise to reduce energy bills by £300 has turned into an increase of £200, can the First Minister outline his government's findings on the impact of independence on living standards and energy bills?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, the Government's paper that was published yesterday makes clear that there are opportunities that exist for Scotland to improve the living standards of people in Scotland by exercising the powers that come with independence. We were promised in 2014 lower bills, financial security and EU membership, and all of those promises have turned to dust. So this is the time for Scotland to have a fresh start with independence.
Megan Gallagher.
Families of residents at a sheltered housing complex in Falkirk are deeply concerned about plans to outsource care services to an external provider. The proposals, which would remove the round-the-clock care service at Tiggetshog Court, form part of an effort to address the £21 million budget shortfall. Families were not properly consulted, and local councillors have expressed their frustration at the lack of influence over decisions made by the IJB. First Minister, should decisions that directly impact local communities be made by councillors or a majority unelected IJB board?
First Minister.
Well, the arrangements for integrated joint boards have been put in place by statute, which have been considered by Parliament, and it's the responsibility of the integrated joint boards to take those decisions, and there will be members of any relevant local authorities on those boards. There should also, however, be appropriate and adequate consultation with people who are affected by service changes. That's an implicit part in all of the approaches that are taken about any service changes that take place, and I would encourage that to be the case in this circumstance.
Thank you. That concludes First Minister's questions. The next item of business is a member's business debate in the name of Claire Adamson, and there will now be a short suspension to allow those leaving the chamber and the public gallery to do so.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Lewis McGlynn.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Saoirse Healy.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Donald C. Stewart. Broadcasting Scotland is Scotland's independent broadcaster, providing factual news, reporting on the issues important to the people of Scotland.
We are committed to public service broadcasting, and with your support, we will produce even more programmes.
Provide opportunities for young people interested in media production and broadcasting, and challenge preconceptions of what Scottish media looks like, amplifying Scotland's voice and reflecting its communities.
We can already deliver high-quality live news, and we will create the highest quality programmes for you to enjoy. But we can only do that with your support.
So please subscribe to and share our channel or donate to Broadcasting Scotland via the link in the description. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.